The Friends of Cuba Society Focus is a group of South Africans campaigning in solidarity with the people of Cuba and for the lifting of the U.S. blockade against Cuba. At the same time, Focus says that it is committed to defending and deepening the gains of our own democracy. Focus says it is concerned that the recent unrest in South Africa was aimed at undermining the rule of law and challenging the foundations of our democracy. And they were taking place at more or less the same time as anti-government protests in Cuba. The group expresses solidarity with all those who have been affected by the unrest and the looting accompanying these. And of particular concern is the threat to food and energy security as a result of these protests, as evidence in the long queues for food starting to form in some parts of the country. To discuss how South Africans can actually draw from the example of resilience and dignity shown by the people of Cuba, I'm joined by Father Michael Lapsley from the Focus Group. Father Michael, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us and a warm welcome to the Globe.
Thank you, Simpiwe. I'm very happy to be with you. And by the way, congratulations to all our athletes as well as to the Springboks. How good is that?
Indeed, it's absolutely astounding that they made us proud the way that they have. Thank you so much for joining us, Father. Now, before we talk about the activities in solidarity with Cuba, we've seen unprecedented protests calling for an end of what they call a dictatorship. So what do you make of that?
Well, I think it's indicative that Cuba finds itself in a very serious situation. And indeed, there were perhaps several thousand Cubans who came out on the streets protesting because of their living conditions. Now, ironically, a few days later, hundreds of thousands of Cubans came out on the street in support of their government. So one has to see it proportionately. But the real problem, in fact, is the U.S. blockade. Because if the U.S. blockade was lifted, there would be a normalization of relations between the people of Cuba and the people of the United States. And they would not be facing the kinds of serious problems they're facing at the moment. And we are seeing also an outpouring of solidarity across the whole world in support of Cuba.
Yeah, tell us more about who the Friends of Cuba Society is and the kind of work that they do.
Well, we're a solidarity organization. We actually started life before 1994. Some of us had returned from exile, some of us living in the country, and we had seen what Cuba had done for us practically since the triumph of the revolution in 1959. And we decided, as we were about to create a democratic society in South Africa, that we needed to return the compliment. And from its very foundation, we were against the illegal and immoral blockade by the United States against Cuba. And incidentally, 185 countries of the United Nations voted in support of Cuba against the blockade just a couple of months ago. But we also sought to create friendship and solidarity, not between just government to government, between the people of Cuba and the people of South Africa. And we've done that in many different ways. Brigades have gone to Cuba. We've had exchanges. We've had cultural film festivals, more and more to deepen the relationship between the two people.
And I understand that the Friends of Cuba Society believes that the ongoing protests in Cuba, in as much as they are understandable, but then it says that it's the United States, especially the White House, that is behind these protests. Where is the Friends of Cuba Society drawing these conclusions from?
Well, there's a great deal of evidence, and it's in the public domain, of the amount of money the United States administration is spending to undermine Cuba. In particular, there is a very strong media campaign of disinformation being spread on social media all over the world, telling lies about the situation in Cuba, telling lies about the Cuban people, and funding anybody in Cuba who would oppose their government.
Now, you are currently based in South Africa, isn't it? So how are you campaigning then in solidarity for the lifting of the U.S. blockade against Cuba when both countries are miles away from our shores?
Now, Simpiwe, how can you say that on a global media platform? Because of the nature of social media, we are able very practically to be in solidarity with people in Cuba on a daily basis. But of course, there's also, interestingly, a very strong Cuban solidarity movement across the United States. And they have been successfully breaking the blockade and sending goods that are needed in Cuba from the United States to Cuba. But of course, the solidarity movement with Cuba is across the whole world. I mean, just recently, Mexico sent food and health goods. So did Vietnam, so did Russia, so did China. So more and more countries of the world are appreciating Cuba's role. And of course, particularly at this time of the pandemic, Cuba has been in the forefront of supporting countries fighting the pandemic, including here in South Africa, and countries with different ideological perspectives, like Italy, for example. And I think many, many other countries have benefited from the Henry Reid international blockade at this time. So Cuba is really showing the world that in the time of a pandemic, healthcare for all is what we need. So Cuba is the example to humanity rather than the United States.
And your recent plans, Father Michael, to stage a motorcade drive as part of an ongoing global solidarity activity with Cuba was called off at the 11th hour. Do we know why?
Yes, it's very simple. South Africa was in a crisis. There was looting, an attempted insurrection, attempted coup in South Africa, and patriotic South Africans had come into all across the country. The fact that the looting and the destruction didn't spread to 9 provinces but only to 2 was because the people of South Africa said, not in our name. So with that kind of focus on the national crisis, we felt it was inappropriate. We needed to be in solidarity, firstly with the people of South Africa, and give space for that. And then, of course, we will proceed in an ongoing way with solidarity with Cuba. But it was a particular crisis moment in our country, and we needed to be sensitive to that.
And why is it important then for South Africans to remain engaged with the Cuban sanctions and demand that the US, the United States ends its economic blockade of the island?
Very simple. It's a matter of justice.
Okay.
It's a matter, the blockade is immoral and unjust. And the world needs a country that can show that society can be organized in the interest of a poor majority rather than a rich minority. And because of what Cuba has done and still does for the world. So, and of course, Cuba in 1959, a very poor country, started giving solidarity to the world. It didn't say, okay, when we sort everything out locally, we will be in solidarity. And that's an important lesson for us as South Africans, because, of course, poor people across the whole world were in solidarity with us when we were fighting apartheid. So we know something about receiving solidarity, and we need an ongoing way to give solidarity to Cuba. It's an issue about our common humanity.
Mm-hmm. And which other countries are involved in this global campaign, and what are your interactions with them?
Well, on a daily basis, we're in contact. We're in contact, for example, with the solidarity organizations in the United States, but also in Mexico and Vietnam, and of course, China, Russia. Many countries at the moment are actually acting very fast. But from time to time, there are international solidarity organizations, and there are people from all continents who are involved in Cuban solidarity. And we are in contact with them, and we get ideas from them. We support each other. And one of the ideas we have is to have much more education between the people of South Africa and the people of Cuba, and create possibilities of webinars, which we've already begun, where South Africans can hear the stories of Cubans, and also so that we can lift the voices of the many South Africans who studied medicine in Cuba, for them to tell their stories of what they gained and learned, which they're already putting into practice in our hospitals and in primary care. So we need to educate ourselves and not buy the fake news about Cuba.
And how has the United States responded to your solidarity campaign? Are you perhaps, engaging the American government at any level about your demands?
When President Obama came to South Africa, I penned on behalf of Friends of Cuba a letter to President Obama about the Cuban Five, who were the 5 Cubans who were imprisoned in the United States, ironically, for fighting terrorism. So we made our voice heard, And subsequently, of course, the 5 were released, not just because of us, but because of solidarity across the world. So we have, and also we have regularly, since we started in 94, been handing communication to the representatives of the United States here in South Africa. But also there are voices in the United States also pressurizing. There's actually a proposed resolution in Congress towards normalizing relations with Cuba. So I think it's every little bit that counts towards that day when Guantanamo Bay will be returned, illegally held by the United States and turned into a torture camp, but that will be returned to Cuba. And there will be freedom for the people of the United States to travel once more to Cuba. And ironically, as relations began to normalize under President Obama, huge number of people from the United States visited Cuba, which was all brought to a halt under Trump. Tragically, Biden has not changed the policy. And so there are a huge number of laws on which the United States seeks not just to punish Cuba, but to punish those countries in the world who are in support of Cuba, which makes it difficult even to send goods and money to Cuba, which is why there's a very serious economic situation in Cuba, and the world needs to come to the aid of Cuba. For Cuba, but also for the sake of the world, where, and not least for us in South Africa, because we have a society with incredible inequality. And Cuba shows us the possibility of organizing society in a different way, in a more humane and a more just way.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you speak of inequality, and we know that South Africa is one of the most unequal nations in the world. Let's turn our attention to matters closer to home now. Focus has also spoken out about the recent unrest in South Africa. So where does the recent violence leave our democracy?
Well, it leaves our democracy under threat, because clearly there were instigators, those who were responsible. And there's more and more evidence coming out. And that's why we as a nation needed to step forward. And I think we did. But it's a warning to us as a nation that unless we deal with inequality, those kind of that is perhaps the greatest threat to our democracy, because that inequality can be exploited by those with evil ends, which is what we saw. So I think we need some pure, and I'm sure you'd agree, we need a national conversation, because 25 years into democracy, our economic system and our political system hasn't delivered, and so we need to reimagine what kind of society. What was encouraging during these last couple of weeks after the terrible looting was local leadership emerging, people of conscience, people of compassion. Clearly another whole area. We have to deal with not just food scarcity, but food sovereignty. We have to find a way that we grow enough food for the nation. We need to have a basic income grant. We need also to tax the rich much more, as well as to obviously create employment for the majority of South Africans. So it is what we in the faith community call a kairos moment, a challenging moment for a whole nation. But Cuba shows us the possibility of something different, which of course is why the United States objects to it so much.
Mm-hmm. And is the ruling party still fit to lead this country, judging by the perennial internal squabbles that have plagued the party since former President Thabo Mbeki's era?
Well, Pio, I should probably ask you how you're going to vote in the next elections. I think, fortunately, because of what happened in the Constitutional Court, we will have direct an ability for people to be not just voting for a party, but voting for an individual. And so we'll begin to have the possibility, what was recommended by the Slavitt Commission, of both constituency representatives as well as, party representatives. But I think the ruling party is on notice. The people of South Africa have had enough of corruption. I think if we begin to see more and more of the corrupt going to prison and the rule of law being more and more honored, and also the instigators brought to book, I think that will give us renewed hope. But the economic transformation, the problem is that those who talk about economic transformation, some of them actually seem to be more committed to looting. So we need politicians with integrity But we as a nation have to hold our politicians to account, as well as perhaps having the kind of democracy, participatory democracy from below, the sorts of things we began to see with the United Democratic Front many years back, that we need to recover that kind of participation in the things that affect us most.
All right, Father Michael, great chatting to you. It's been an absolute pleasure having you join us this evening. Thanks indeed for your time.
Thank you, Cynthia.
That was Father Michael Lapsley from the focus group, which is the Friends of Cuba Society, joining us via Skype. This is The Globe on SABC News. Let's take a quick break. We'll be back in a moment.